I remember being so incredibly profound as a teenager. I recall standing in front of an audience and the adjudicator in a public speaking competition and saying very sagely and maybe a little pretentiously the following: in the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied, but unbowed. Dramatic pause. I think that what I was trying to say is that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. It would take about 25 years for me to understand exactly what I was saying, when for the second time in a period of 12 weeks, I would have a gun placed at my head in a robbery that would cause me to face adversity, none of which I had faced before. The journey that followed for me was a brutal one and a painful one, but one that I will always be grateful for, because that was the gift that I received at the time when I needed it most. Adversity was arguably one of the best things that ever happened to me. I'm Howard Feldman, and I'm your host for this afternoon's Born in Adversity Summit. On behalf of Synthesis Software Technologies and Amazon Web Services, it is my privilege to welcome you and all of our panelists to what I know will be an incredible experience. My life changed that day. At that point in time, I was running a commodity trading company. We had 6 offices around the world. I was traveling 2, possibly out of every 4 weeks in a month. And my family was growing up with me as a provider of a credit card, but of little else. That afternoon, as I stood on the driveway with my hands covering my face, and as I contemplated my second close encounter with mortality, I knew that for me it was time to reevaluate. And what followed was 2 years of such evaluation. I exited the trade of commodities. I became an author. I wrote 3 books. I became a weekly columnist and a talk show host before I stumbled across the magical Synthesis Software Technologies, where today I'm head of people and I'm head of marketing. Each morning when I wake up at 4 a.m. to prepare for my morning show, each day when I write, and each day at Synthesis is testimony to the adversity that I endured. We each have our stories, and we would love to share them. Please share the hashtag Synthesis Startup Stories or email us, because we would love to hear yours. Our speakers this afternoon, Vusi Thembekwayo, Eldred Jordan, Benji Meltzer, Catherine Lukoff, Dricus van der Walt, and Dean Meyer, will present their stories, and that will be followed by a panel discussion. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat section, and I will do what I can and what I'm able to present some of them to the speakers. I also invite you to participate in the series of polls that we will be sending out along the way. The more engagement, the more powerful the session. Good afternoon to you, and welcome to the Synthesis and AWS Born in Adversity Summit. Vusi Thembekwayo is a business speaker who empowers his audience with new knowledge and research and tools that they can immediately use and apply to their businesses or their careers. At 25, Vusi ran a 400 million rand division of a 17 billion rand multinational, and today is widely regarded as one of the most disruptive forces in the venture capital area of Africa. Vusi was amongst the youngest directors of a listed company in South Africa and now serves on several boards. Currently, he is CEO of a boutique investment and advisory firm in Africa. He is also, as you know, not shy to tell us exactly what he thinks. Vusi Thembekwayo, leading at the edge of chaos.
Here we go. How are you doing? Thank you so much, Howard, for having me here, and to everybody that's joined this session. Thank you very much. I'm not sure about this not being shy to tell people what I think. I think it's got to be timed, and if you get it wrong, you can certainly make a few mistakes. So I've been thinking a bit about kind of our conversation today and what I thought I would share, what I would reflect on, and how we would frame that conversation so that we can have a decent panel, and I can try and add some texture to some of the thoughts here. So there clearly is no denying that we are living in very interesting times. I read the other day that somebody was saying this is the most complex time for human beings ever. That's clearly not true. Human beings have been through far, far worse. I think for those of us who are growing up in this time, who are in this particular generation, because this is a once in 100-year type of event, we're experiencing it for the first time. So we kind of think that these are unprecedented times for mankind. That's not the case. What it means to be human is that you are adaptable. The very reason our species, the sapiens, outlived the Neanderthals was because they were more adept. It's not because they were stronger. It was just because they were more adept. And so today, in the spirit of kind of that frame of evolution, we find ourselves in a time where once again, we have to adapt. For many of us, it feels foreign because we'd kind of gotten used to the way things were. For many of us, we grew up in a particular system that told us the things we were doing was preparing us for the life we wanted. Now we're questioning whether or not we want that life, and we're realizing that some of those things didn't prepare us for the future. So here we are, and here we sit. What I thought I'd do, just to give context to the conversation first, was to frame some of the macros. So here are the macro stats. These are just the numbers. Numbers are funny, right? Because they're true, but you can attach an awful lot of emotion to them. So here are the stats. As we sit, Wendy, my good friend Wendy, tells me that the restaurant industry in the first 6 weeks of lockdown lost over 400,000 jobs. They've not yet been able to quantify how many jobs have been lost since. Those are the numbers. In South Africa, we went into this lockdown already in a recession. We'd had 3 successive quarters of economic decline. Our economy was finally downgraded by Moody's, unfortunately, to sub-investment grade, what you and I as lay people call junk status. Unemployment had breached the 30% level, which, by the way, is an important number. Because even though our economists tell us we're in recession, the truth is that we're actually mimicking all the signs of a state in depression. Here is the truth of it, is that when the United States was going through the Great Depression, you recognize that economic time was so difficult, it's described by 2 adjectives: Great Depression. That even at that time, the unemployment rate in the US was marginally north of 24%. Today, in South Africa, over the past 3 years, we've had an unemployment rate well over 27%. Then it breached 29%. Now we're at the over 30% mark. That notwithstanding, global studies tell us that we've got one of the most unequal societies if you look at the Gini coefficient. So if you look at this and then you juxtapose it with all the other things we say, stuff like we have the most well-developed, most liquid capital market system in the continent. The JSE is a wonder of the continent. The levels of volumes, liquidity, as well as robustness and regulation and legislations really are first world standard. South Africa is kind of caught, in my mind, between these 2 spaces. In many respects, we are a first world country in a third world context. And in even more truer respects, Many of the citizens in the country live in the third world, with some fighting their way to migrate into that first world. Those are the facts. When I was growing up, I remember I was a 15-year-old boy, and we weren't particularly well-to-do. So one holiday, I wrote up my CV, and I went to, at the time it had just been opened in Benoni, a mall called Lakeside Mall. And I walked each and every single store in that mall, handing my CV, looking for a job. And I got none. Didn't even get a call back. So I identify all too well with young people in South Africa who feel disillusioned, disenfranchised, and completely excluded from being a part of the legacy of what we're building. I identify all too well with the majority of citizens in South Africa who don't feel like they're included in what it means to be South African. The reason I think, and I say this with humility, please, I've had some success in business, is precisely because I come from that context. So for me, and for what many of my business counterparts, is an academic exercise of trying to understand people in that environment. For me, it's a lived, well understood context of being. It's a reality I've immersed myself in. It's a reality I've lived. I think that if you're an entrepreneur in business today, the single most important currency you can have is empathy. The ability to step into the shoes of your would-be customer and see the world through their eyes. See the world through their eyes. Understand their fears, their hopes, their dreams, their ambitions. Because if we can understand those things, then we can better frame what it is that's important. You know, the difference at the end of the day between a business owner and an entrepreneur is that business owners want to run businesses, deliver profit, run P&Ls. Entrepreneurs are really obsessive about solving problems. So even though we are in the moment we're in, the truth is that for many of us, we've built businesses that were solving a problem that our customers no longer value, are no longer willing to pay for, or for many, just no longer exists. Yesterday, I had a strat session with one of the businesses that I'm invested in. And so we were having this exact conversation, and I said to them, one of the things I think we should really think about is where in the hierarchy of needs do we fall as a business? Because what we're seeing in this time of crisis is that there's certain things human beings will always want. And those things typically tend to rate lower down the hierarchy of needs. The basic needs, the basic goods. Many of us had migrated into the space of building stuff because it looked cool, creating products because they looked cool, but we weren't actually solving a real life problem. So I thought I would share with you a couple of thoughts, and I've got them here in my presentation. So let's see if I can share screen. There we go. And so I want to see if I can share with you a couple of thoughts to better help you understand exactly what it is I'm talking about, insofar as us as human beings building businesses and making sure that those businesses are aligned to the time, aligned to the moment, aligned to the customers we're serving and the experiences of those customers today. I think that if you're really trying to build a business, there has never been a better time than now. I really do believe it. But I also do believe that you and I are going to have to fundamentally rethink how we've approached our businesses and how we've approached the way we do business. One of the things I think we need to perhaps have a look at is what this means in terms of how we architecture our businesses, what it means in terms of how we approach our businesses, and then what it means in terms of how we architecture our value propositions, our conversations with customers, and who those customers are. So there are a few tips and tricks that I want to share with you that I think are going to be absolutely important in living through a time like this. First, whatever the myth that you've architectured around your business, your value proposition, your brand, now is the time to lean in. Lean into that myth. Many of us grew up, as I did, with parents who taught us that it was good to eat carrots because carrots were good for your eyes. The scientific evidence tells us that that's actually not true. There is no link between carotene and the quality of your eyesight. So the question then becomes, where does this myth come from? Well, in World War II, there was a pilot that flew for the Royal Air Force Navy. And this particular pilot used to love carrots. In fact, it is said he ate a carrot a day. He was also the first pilot that the Royal Air Force Navy, Navy, which flies for the British Armed Forces. It is also that same pilot who was used to test a skunkworks project, which used radar technology. So whereas most of the other pilots flew out in the day to fight the Nazis, he flew out at night. He had a far higher hit rate, by the way, far higher hit rate. And as a consequence of this, people thought he could see planes at night because he ate a carrot a day. It's not true. He just had radar technology. But the point about it is, here we are close to a century later, and you're probably still telling your kids, eat your carrots because it's good for your eyes. So you've got to wonder to yourself, how many other myths, learned legends, ideas have we embedded into our psyche today? The reason when you build a business, you build a brand, it's precisely because you want to create a mythology around what you stand for, who you are, and what you represent. Now is the time to lean in to exactly what that means and what you stand for. So in our own firm, we built this idea and this mythology around the fact that we say we exist for the entrepreneur. That while many of our other competitors in the capital markets exist for the investors they invest for, we exist fundamentally for the entrepreneur, the jockey actually running the business. And so for us, when we publish, as I have been on social media over the past few weeks, the success stories of businesses we've invested in, the perspective is told from the perspective of the entrepreneur, not the investors on behalf of whom we invest. So lean in to that mythology. Second, this is the time to be agile. Now, there are different types of intellect when you run a business. There's IQ. IQ, by the way, think about it as stuff like the stuff that we know, we can quantify, data, big data, analytics, all of the stuff we put in Tableau models, all that kind of stuff. That's all the IQ of a business. Then there's the EQ, which is stuff around the construction of the business, the culture, that idea that culture will eat strategy for breakfast. It's also stuff around how leaders lead in that environment. That's all EQ. AQ is very much around your ability to be agile and adaptable to the moment. Now, most people see this image, no one man in that image, and that's the person to your left, Mike Tyson, Iron Mike Tyson, arguably the most ferocious boxer of all time. Without doubt, the most dominating boxer of the 20th century. Few people know the person to his right. That is Cus D'Amato, Mike Tyson's trainer. Cus D'Amato made Mike Tyson Mike Tyson. It's a big statement, but it's true. And the reason Mike Tyson was so ferocious is because he trained in a form of boxing based on a form of martial arts called peekaboo. Small movements, fast, agile movements, and always knock out your opponent with the uppercut. So watch the first 22 professional fights of Mike Tyson. 21 of them end by KO, all of them in an identical way, the uppercut. Why is this important? Because Mike Tyson didn't train as a classical boxer. He trained as a martial artist in the form of boxing. The reason he was unbeatable was because every other opponent he was facing thought he was a boxer. He wasn't. He was a martial artist. So to truly be agile in your business, one of the things you have to learn to do is to stop thinking about your business the way you've thought about your business. If you remember nothing else from my thoughts here, and I'm cognizant of time, please remember this. Most of us build our businesses based on the demographic. This is the way marketers have taught us to look at businesses. So if I asked you who's your ideal customer, you go race, age, gender, generation, you go education, you go consumption, spending, credit worthiness, et cetera, et cetera. You look at all the demographic data. But today in South Africa, there is a young person growing up in Diepsloot, wearing Timberland shoes, listening to Jay-Z, that sounds exactly like a young person growing up in New York, and he's never left Diepsloot. Because we no longer live in the age of demographics. What the internet has done, the wonder of the World Wide Web, 3G, 4G, 5G. I remember a time when the World Wide Web was the World Wide Wait. But the rate at which our world has been connected today means we no longer have demographics. In fact, what we have are psychographics. So if you really want to be agile in your business, stop thinking about your consumer as a demographic and try and understand your buyers as a psychographic. What's driving them? What do they want? What's important to them? What informs their decision making? What are the values about which they are absolutely seized? The psychographic. Then the final thoughts I want to share with you. Recognize in your business today that value is changing. The way we thought about values in our society has fundamentally shifted. And it's shifted on 5 axes. First, identity. What does it mean to be who you are? Are you the data around which an identity of yours is constructed? So every single time you go onto Google and you search something, it keeps the information and then it logs it in your cookies. And the next time you log, it shows you that information again. Is that who you are? Or who your parents raised you to be? Or who you are when you're with your friends at the braai? Or who you are when you're at the church? So the very idea of how your identity is constructed today is fundamentally shifting. We're seeing people and groups come out of the margins that want to be recognized today. Black Lives Matter, LGBTQI. All of those are groups that are coming out of the margins that say, I'm just as important and my identity is just as valid. So when you're building your business and your value proposition, think very lucidly about identity and what that means. Second, wealth. The way we think about wealth is changing, and Howard mentioned it in his introduction. Having suffered a burnout twice, I can tell you that it's not fun. But we've always thought about wealth as money, right? And disposable income and the stuff we can buy. What we've learned through this lockdown period is actually turns out that wealth is relationships. Can you be in lockdown with your partner for 21 days and not want to drive yourself nuts? Are you spending time with your family and your kids? And for those of us who are building businesses like myself, our firm today is in 17 portfolio companies, just in my VC firm alone. Private equity firm, we're in 7 portfolio companies. I'm sitting on 9 boards. All of these are very important in terms of building wealth, but at the end of the day, that's not really what wealth is. Wealth is about balance and time. It's me getting to see my kids play the soccer outside. And so even the way your customers think about wealth is changing. Third, legacy. What do you want to stand for? Who do you want to be? When it's all said and done, and the hymns have been written about your life, what will they say? Who will you be? Fourth, and this is an important one, it's a great fault line, the archetype of masculinity. When I was growing up in corporate, building a career, there was a particular way you conducted yourself, a certain way you were assertive, you were aggressive, a particular way that you spoke. It was very much a part of the boardroom culture. The word they used in the Americas, it's locker room talk. But we're seeing too that archetype of masculinity actually doesn't serve us. We're seeing great growth in brands that are challenging that archetype of masculinity, softening it, making it a bit more human. So think about for yourself about what that means in terms of how you're constructing product, how you're building value proposition, how you're communicating to your customers. And finally, the idea of free. We live in a world today where everything is free. For many of you in this conversation, you're in it and you're not paying a cent. And so in a world where the marginal cost is 0, that changes how you build a business now. So how do you build a business and a value proposition and convince customers to buy it when you can't charge them for it? How do you go from premium to freemium? I think all of these values combined are going to be a fundamental shift that almost all of us as entrepreneurs need to make today going forward into that future. And if you don't make that shift, you will not be able to build an exponential business. Before I hand back to Howard, I want to leave you with a very important exercise for you to try. I do it every single year. It is the most powerful tool any entrepreneur, any startup owner, any founder, and any leader can use in their business. Write a letter to yourself and post that letter. Detail in the letter how you're feeling, what you're going through, how you're experiencing the world. Detail your anxieties, your hopes, your fears. And then detail in the letter what you're going to do to address every single issue you highlight in the letter. Post it to yourself and keep it for a year. You'll be fascinated how at the end of the year, you have a great sense of context when you look back at that year and understand the things that you've achieved. So yes, we're going through a difficult time today. Yes, we're going through a complex time today. But this is a time for you and I as entrepreneurs to actively seek to be disappointed by our heroes. Because the people we hold up as heroes became heroes in a particular context, given a particular set of rules. That context doesn't apply. Those rules have changed. And I know it's easy to say, but it's also hard to do. So very quickly, have a look at this.
People who've been in the rocketry business for decades, who say about you that you don't know what you don't know.
Well, I suppose that's true of anyone. How can anyone know what they don't know?
But when critics say you can't do this, your answer to them is,
we've done it.
He's done it in partnership with NASA, which has given SpaceX technical advice and a contract worth up to $1.6 billion, mostly for 12 cargo flights to the space station. But SpaceX's lack of experience bothers some NASA legends like Apollo astronauts Neil Armstrong and Gene Cernan. They've testified to Congress that the Obama administration's drive to commercialize space could compromise safety and eventually cost the taxpayers.
Now is the time to overrule this administration's pledge to mediocrity.
You know, there are American heroes who don't like this idea. Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan have both testified against commercial spaceflight in the way that you're developing it. And I wonder what you think of that.
I was very sad to see that because those guys are, those guys are heroes of mine, so it's really tough. I wish they would come and visit and see the hardware that we're doing here. And I think that would change their mind.
They inspired you to do this, didn't they?
Yes.
And to see them casting stones in your direction.
It's difficult.
Tell me, have you ever seen Elon Musk look that human? Even Elon Musk. So, what have yours and my hero given us? The gift of a democracy, the gift of a beautiful country. But those heroes have also disappointed us. They're disappointing us as we speak, which means the challenge for you and I is how do we become the solutions to the challenges they've left for us? It's not about sitting on the sidelines and making a noise. At the end of the day, you've got to get stuck in and get involved. If you're going to build a startup, make sure it's about social impact and making a difference and actually doing stuff that matters in people's lives. This is the time for us to seek to be actively disappointed by our heroes by building amazing, amazing inclusive businesses. Thank you. Howard, back to you, Squire.
Yes, but I'm not going to let you go so quickly, although we're going to bring you back a little bit later for the panel.
Yeah.
Just one question that I wanted to ask you, and it generally often concerns me here in South Africa, because I feel that because of the legacy of the past, we perhaps don't always have the right entrepreneurial spirit. And why I say that is because many people that have come through the system and have found secured positions in corporates don't want to risk, or might not want to risk, giving those up in order to become entrepreneurs. To become an entrepreneur, as you well know, takes an enormous amount of courage. How do you harness the courage in order to become an entrepreneur and follow what should be your dreams?
Yeah, great question. I think, so one of the things I think we clearly have to be aware of is human beings are carrot and stick creatures. We behave according to the incentive system. So the only reason you're seeing top talent not want to get into the realm of, entrepreneurship, founder, business owner is because the risk reward system doesn't work. In many other countries in the world, if you look at the US, the size of the capital markets, the liquidity of the capital markets, the amount of money available in pre-seed, then Series A funding, there's such a quantum of capital there that you can foreseeably build a reasonably decent business and earn an income from it. In South Africa, that's not the case. There isn't a lot of pre-seed activity. There's almost no seed activity. And then there's some work in Series A and Series B. So that discourages participation, particularly from Black African people. So on the one end, you've got a state that goes, build businesses and let's make a difference. And then on the other end, you've got a recognition that that's clearly not working because you don't have the size of capital markets that you require. If you don't fix that, you can't do it through social engineering. You can write policies and say, I want to get 38,000 Black female entrepreneurs between the ages of 16 and 35. It ain't going to happen if you don't change the incentive system. which means you've got to get the capital available. You've got to get the credit ratings agencies to give better credits. You've got to get the banks to free up some of their capital requirements. You've got to get the state DFIs. Everybody's got to get actually involved in the project. That's about delivering the number. Remember, at the end of the day, the number is the outcome. The process is what's more important. And in South Africa, what's missing is a strong process to support the ambitions.
All right, Vusi, we're gonna leave it there. We're gonna bring you back a little bit later on the panel and continue with questions there. Moving on to our next speaker, Eldred Jordan is the founder and chief executive of GovChat.org. That's the official citizen engagement platform for the South African government. Eldred is a former ministerial special advisor and served as an advisory board member at Mixit. Eldred currently serves as digital communications advisor to various African governments and is a United States of America Department of State IVLP alumni. Eldred, a very good afternoon to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Again, a huge thank you to Synthesis and AWS for investing in our startups, investing in this country. It's a massive honor to be able to speak to you and share a bit about the GovChat story. Many of you know me as the founder and CEO, but many of you don't know that I make coffee at GovChat and spend a lot of time here trying to do some crazy things. Just a bit about the GovChat platform and how it started. Started out of a platform called Mixit. Many of you, I think, met your girlfriends or your boyfriends on the Mixit platform. We even know some of you got married on the Mixit platform. But for a long time, Mixit was probably the most, and I think still is, the most successful technology messaging platform on the African continent. At Mixit, for about 11 years, we probably did about 88 million users, registered users in about 120 countries, doing 1 billion messages each and every single day. Now, this is obviously way before Facebook and way before WhatsApp, and also obviously started out in the high schools of Mitchell's Plain. My role at Mixit was looking after government and had quite a few successful use cases at Mixit, where we tried to understand whether there was appetite for young South Africans aged between 18 and 35 to engage with the South African government. Very quickly, we got to about 1 million users in less than 3 months and found out that it was not national government issues that these young South Africans wanted to engage on, but they wanted to engage around local government issues around access to water, issues around access to electricity, to housing. We also found out that about 80% of South Africans did not know who their public representatives were. And after about 11 years, Mixit closed down. I was on my way back from the US, and I got called in and said that, look, this business is closing down. I then needed to understand my next move. I decided to take my learnings at Mixit, and I will say that I will have to declare, as Howard said, that I am a former public servant. I'm the former special advisor to the Minister of Public Enterprises. I must declare that the challenges of Eskom and SAA, Denel and Transnet is not my fault, even though I was there during a very special time. But what I did was I decided to use my learnings at Mixit and within the public sector and build a platform, a very simplistic technology platform that does one thing, and that is to connect citizens with government. It has been about a 3 to 4 year journey where I've taken my own financial resources to build this platform, and like Vusi will tell you, like many startups, we have many challenges. And unfortunately, this entrepreneurial journey became a bit too tough. I lost everything. I needed to move back into my mom's place, my wife, and my daughter, and it was really tough. I still can't believe this is happening, to be honest. On the day that I decided that it was a bit too hectic, I got a call from someone that I did not know, who was watching the work that I was doing on social media, and asked if I needed any assistance. I said, "Hey man, I see the work that you're doing. Do you need any help?" I told him that I think I'm done. I think that I had enough. And this person had said, "Well, here's $1 million US. See if you can take that concept into something tangible." 11 months later, a JSE listed entity by the name of Capital Appreciation also sees the work that we are doing and invests 20 million Rand into GovChat. 30 million in 12 months. Thereafter, Absa Bank comes in and gives some more funds. Today, GovChat is the official engagement platform for the South African government, built very differently. We don't believe in building apps just as yet for two reasons. The first is the cost of data in South Africa is still too expensive. And the second reason is that majority of mobile phones in this country are still Android phones. And these Android phones come with a limited space. You'll also find out that Android phones come with preloaded applications, messaging applications, like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. And so what GovChat has done, together with Synthesis, our technology partner, is to build technology that integrates into messaging platforms that you already have on your phone. So there's no need to download any applications. You would add GovChat as a contact, just like you would add your girlfriend or your wife and your girlfriend, and you can connect with your public representatives or with your government. I am going to share a very short presentation that I shared about 3 weeks ago to the presidency, to the statistician general, to the SARS commissioner, and about 20 director generals within government. This document that I will share a very short snippet with you will kind of give you a view around the impact that GovChat has had and COVID-19 has had on the South African citizens and on South Africa. And let me just share the screen with you. It's the state of service report. This report will only be made public and released the second week of August. And just basically a bit about the background. As I said, GovChat is the official engagement platform for the South African government using channels like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. We have just completed the USSD component of GovChat, and we'll release it with MTN pretty soon. GovChat also has an open government partnership and has contractual agreements with the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, with the Department of Social Development, with the Department of Health, with SALGA, with SASSA that looks after 17.5 million grant recipients, and the IEC as well. As you can see, it started with me, but today these are the beautiful faces of GovChat and the faces behind the technology that built GovChat. An amazing group of people that has built the technology that millions of South Africans are currently using. Just around the current features, today citizens can find out by a drop of a pin, find out who their public representatives are. More than 10,000 public representatives are on the GovChat platform. We have also mapped out well over 60,000 of government spaces on the GovChat platform, allowing citizens to rate the services and the infrastructure of those institutions. And those institutions are home affairs offices, courts, police stations, schools, healthcare clinics, IEC offices. We also connect citizens directly with all 257 municipalities, allowing them to report water issues, electricity issues, pothole issues, and various municipal issues. And then the two big features that has just been built. The one feature, the COVID-19 feature, which is a feature that the president announced on Sunday past, where citizens are able to exclusively get their test results using the GovChat WhatsApp line. Citizens are also able to find out where the closest testing station is and then do monitoring of their COVID-19 symptoms. And then the big feature that's making up a lot of the activity on the GovChat platform is SASSA. GovChat has digitized the social relief of distress grant application, making it the largest social relief application form on the African continent. From a GovChat user stats point of view, currently we have about 5.5 million active users that we've basically gained in the last few weeks, and these users come from 28.2% come from Gauteng, 20.1% come from KZN, and the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape make up 10.2% and 11.9%. A very important slide, and that is that GovChat has processed well over 170 million messages in the last few weeks. I still can't believe that this has happened. Just showed the huge appetite for South African citizens to use the GovChat platform. And then just the final use case that I'd like to present around the impact that COVID-19 has had on South African citizens, and using the use case of the social relief of distress project on GovChat. We have received well over 3.3 million applications on the GovChat or through the GovChat platform. We were also able to submit close to 1.5 million applications directly to SASSA. You will obviously see that close to half of those applications we could not send through to SASSA, purely because WhatsApp does not allow citizens to provide personal information on the platform. And so what GovChat did was created a secure web form portal to allow citizens to complete that application, to then enter details of ID details and address details, and then obviously some more personal details. And at its peak, GovChat was able to do 12,000 messages each and every single minute. Now, this is a very important slide because it shows the economic impact that COVID-19 has had on the South African economy. It is showing signs of distress currently, and at a granular level, you will also see that citizens coming from the city of Johannesburg, making up 26% of those that is applying for a SRD grant, 23% coming from the Bushbuck Ridge area, and 18% coming from the city of Tshwane. Alarming stats, viewers, because it shows that the economic hub the Gauteng province, the economic hub of this country, is in distress. Obviously, the city of Cape Town and Ekurhuleni is following pretty closely after that, also being economic hubs of South Africa. From a user demographic point of view, 61% of all those that is applying for a grant is aged between 18 and 35. A young population in distress, a young population needing help and applying for 350 Rand. You'll also see that 31% of the users are coming back to the GovChat platform, searching and finding out how far the application is in being processed and how soon they will get their funds back. But the most alarming slide is this slide. Well over 50,000 South Africans using iPhone 10s is applying for a 350 Rand grant. Now, you and I both know that the cost of an iPhone 10 costs between 7 and 10,000 Rand. But they are applying for a SRD grant of 350 Rand. If you look at the Samsung, Android, and Huawei models, these models cost are coming in between 2,500 and 4,500 Rand. If you are taking them on contract for 24 months, the cost is 400 Rand every single month. But applying for a 350 Rand grant. I'm going to leave my presentation there. But what I did want to say is, for those of you that is trying to start a business or want to take on this crazy startup journey, there's 3 pieces of advice that I'd like to give you. And the first one is follow your purpose. Don't chase money. I think that you will be disappointed very quickly. Chase your purpose. Make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. The second important fact that tip that I'd like to share is marry the right person. Vusi will tell you entrepreneurship is a very lonely journey. And my wife, Natalie, that is watching this, and Tarabel, Tanya, and Talia that is watching, make it very easy for me to be able to take on this very lonely journey, because they support me every single day. And then I'd like to leave you with my dad's favorite scripture, Psalm 30, verse 5, that says, tears and joy, tears and sorrow might last for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Thank you very much.
Eldred, thank you very much. Absolutely incredible and really inspiring. We're going to bring you back a little bit later when we reassemble the panel. So we wanted to showcase a number of different types of businesses and different types of struggles along the journey towards success and towards entrepreneurship. Our next speaker is Benji Meltzer. He is the co-founder of Aerobotics 5 years ago, and currently he is the CTO. He's on MSc in Neurotechnology with data science, specializing with a specialization from Imperial College London. Benji worked on supply analytics at Uber in sub-Saharan Africa. Benji, a very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Howard. Can you guys hear me okay? Take that as a yes. Firstly, apologies all. I was actually having internet problems at home, so I'm at a cafe down the road, explaining the decor behind me and the background music, but hopefully you can all hear. The context of on my presentation today was going to give you all a bit of a background about our story, the story behind Aerobotics, how we got going, and then just a quick kind of overview of what we actually do, the technology that we build, and the problem that we set out to solve. So just starting off, wanted to give you a little bit of context in terms of how we started and how we got to where we are today. As Howard mentioned, we started Aerobotics in 2014. So just over 5 years ago, almost 6 years now. Started by myself and James Patterson. We were both engineers, or we are both engineers, studied at UCT in Cape Town. James grew up on a citrus farm up in the Western Cape. He had a specific interest in aerial technology and specifically drone technology. And as a result, went on to MIT to study a master's in autonomous flight planning and kind of drone design. On my side, my interest was kind of more in the data analytics and data science aspect, and kind of pursued a career and research area in that regard. And basically, ever since we'd met and studied together at UCT, we'd always agreed that we wanted to start a business together one day. We just didn't necessarily know what we wanted to do. And basically, when we were both sitting overseas, James in Boston and myself in London, we realized that and kind of had the spark that despite being exposed to some of the top kind of talent in the world at these universities, there's just such an opportunity to come back to South Africa and build world-leading technology locally. The thinking was the access to talent that we've got here, the quality of that talent, and the price that you pay for it was just a lot more kind of feasible to get a technology business built off the ground. And in the tech space, there's an opportunity to kind of build your product in an unsaturated market, focusing on really solving a customer proposition rather than competing in an otherwise saturated market, and focusing on things like fundraising and competition rather than solving an actual problem. And so we kind of jumped around pitching ideas to each other, and eventually landed on the context of aerobotics, which was really driven by James's background in growing up on a farm. Farming is obviously a super traditional industry, and there's immense risk during production around losses in production, whether it be pest or disease or other potential losses. And farmers really struggle to make data-driven decisions. And the thinking behind aerobotics was the reason that farmers struggle to make these decisions is often just because the data itself doesn't exist. And if it did exist, the tools to interpret that data and make those decisions were also kind of non-existent. And so we believed, and I think quite naively, that we could come back to South Africa and try solve all of these problems from collecting this data, where our view is we'd use drones and imagery in mapping out farmland, collecting high-resolution imagery at scale, building the analytics capability to process this imagery and turn it into some sort of a decision, and building all of the kind of software applications on top of that to expose this information to farmers to make decisions. Like I said, it was kind of quite naive thinking that we could do all of that, but it's a mentality that's really stuck with us up until now. And yeah, from that point on, we built a team. Our first 10 employees or so were all engineers. We were building our own hardware, drones, cameras, etc., selling them off to farmers, making enough of a margin to kind of get through month to month, and growing the business from there. Basically, along that journey, the market started evolving quite a bit. The technology started becoming a bit more commonplace. We kind of progressed to later stages of that sort of Gartner hype cycle of seeing more adoption in the market, and a lot of the technology itself started becoming commoditized, specifically on the hardware space. I mean, you would have all seen the drone hardware that's out there in the market now, and you could buy something off the shelf for significantly cheaper and significantly better than what we were building. So at that point, we kind of made the decision to shift almost entirely into the software space, building a subscription-based model, software as a service, where growers subscribe on a seasonal basis and get access to our technology, and started rolling out this type of model in scaling and growing around the world. And at that stage, we started getting into the whole VC space, got our heads around seed funding, Series A, recently Series B, and built a kind of operational and distribution function around the engineering team that we'd built to scale and grow the business. And yeah, in doing so, kind of learned through a whole lot of mistakes and building up some business sense to get us to where we are today. So that's a quick overview of the background. Happy to dig into any questions on that side a little bit later on. But just thought it would be interesting to show you a bit more on the technology front and the product to explain what we actually do and where we are today. So just as mentioned, the problem that we set out to solve is that of the inability to make decisions on the farm during production. We focus very much on high-value crops or specialty crops, things like citrus, nuts, etc., where aspects like pest and disease causes problems on yield loss of up to 30%, as an example. There's huge losses throughout the world in trees dying and obviously yield being impacted. And without any information, the growers aren't able to make intervention decisions on how to correct for these issues. Another problem that we set out to solve is that of yield estimation, where there's just an inability to kind of make a data-driven forecast in the season of how much yield could be expected at harvest. That information is obviously super valuable upstream for decisions at harvest. So what we do is we essentially map out every single tree on the farm. The spinning tree on the left is an example of drone reconstructed imagery that we collect and analyze a range of metrics for each tree. Tree by tree, we calculate things like the size of the tree, the health, the canopy area, the volume. And in that regard, we've built a massive proprietary data set now of, it's actually about 90 million trees around the world now that have been kind of digitized in the platform. We are also building this yield estimation technology where we're now getting down to a fruit level and analyzing the individual fruit. Again, this number is a little bit out of date, actually crossing kind of 2 million at the moment. And similarly, on the pest and disease side, we're building this diagnostic capability to help farmers intervene in the right time at the right place. The way that we do this is a drone flies an autonomous flight over the orchard at about 80 to 100 meters, capturing a combination of visual and multispectral imagery. Just for your sense, multispectral imagery is mostly in the near infrared band and gives you a sense of vegetation health or stress before you could pick it up with the naked eye. This imagery is then processed on AWS, and we've built kind of a whole lot of proprietary processing capabilities to generate these high-resolution maps of different sources of data from that flight. And then running machine learning models on that data, we do things like identify each individual tree and calculate stats on a tree-by-tree basis. So really getting down to a granular set of information. These metrics like size and health are extracted and exposed to the grower through our platform AeroView. Farmers are able to use this in different ways. In number 5 over there is an example where you could download this file, plug it into your variable rate applicators, and essentially correct or treat for this problem automatically. So that would be a tractor driving through the orchard and spraying automatically dependent on the actual health of the trees. So rather than just blanket applying some sort of intervention, it's really using the underlying data to make a decision. And further, we've built mobile technology to help the grower actually walk into the orchard in a more data-driven way and help us with the diagnosis in deciding what the actual problem is on the ground at a point in time. The way that the business model works is we use a drone network. Myself and a few others were at Uber before this, and we've kind of leveraged our thinking to build a similar type of marketplace where we don't fly the drones ourselves. I mentioned earlier, we don't build them ourselves either. And we've built up this network of pilots around the world that we basically schedule jobs for to go and collect data throughout the season for our growers. We've got over 150 companies around the world now that we've helped sort of spin up, and again, build all of the technology around the flight side of things to plan the flight, collect the data, and upload that data into our platform. So this is just another kind of piece of IP that we've developed and barrier that we've built in helping us scale into other markets. As mentioned, this is our web application app that lets you take us data into the field where the farmers can really engage with this data. And the whole goal here is to help them make these decisions quickly and easily in a data-driven manner. The second application that I quickly wanted to run through is that of yield estimation. At the moment, the kind of way that farmers predict or estimate their yield are extremely manual and labor intensive. And it involves, as displayed in that GIF on the left, kind of walking into the field, climbing into a tree, counting fruit, and doing your best kind of estimate by extrapolating across the rest of the orchard. And this is another problem where we believe that we could bring a much more sort of objective and scalable approach to solving this using, again, drones. In this case, we fly the drone within the orchard about 2 to 3 meters away from a tree and actually count and identify all of the fruit on the canopy of that tree. And there we're building machine learning models, again, to take this information and turn it into an estimate of how much yield is on the ground at a point in time. at flight, so at the time of flying, there's a range of different metrics that we offer the farmer. There's a size distribution report where we basically identify the size of each individual fruit on the canopy of that tree, build a distribution showing them what the size distribution looks like in the farm. This is really important information for a grower because it gives a sense of what type of intervention they might want to take, as they're targeting very specific sizes for things like export at harvest. Similarly, given that we're capturing this visual data, we're able to extract the color of the fruit, which we present in a kind of color palette to the growers. And again, there's interventions that can be taken to correct for things like color maturing too slowly or too quickly in the season. And this is often used to do things like plan for harvest. And all of this data is, again, exposed through our web platform. We then take this information and forecast it through to harvest, where growers can do things like estimate the size distribution at picking, estimate the tonnage at picking, and really make data-driven decisions in the season to get to that point. So I realize this was a fortune of information, but just wanted to give a little bit of context behind the actual technology and what we build. Just finishing off to give you a sense of where we are in the world at the moment. Our headquarters are based in Cape Town, where I'm based with the bulk of the tech and operational team. Our commercial headquarters are in California, and we're focusing very heavily on the US market at the moment, where there's a huge opportunity and the market's quite ripe for this type of technology. We've also got a presence in Europe, and recently a presence in Sydney and Australia, and kind of spanning across the world with the software as a service model as we grow. So yeah, that covers the bulk of my presentation. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview, and happy to dig into any questions a bit later on.
All right, we will certainly come back to you. The one question that I do have is, can you ask them if any of that alcohol behind you is perhaps for sale?
I've got a big sign here saying no alcohol sales Monday to Sunday. So no, doesn't look like it.
All right, well, that's a bit disappointing. It was very hard to concentrate on the presentation, as good as it was, with all of that alcohol there flirting and teasing us in the background. Benji, thank you. We'll be back with you in a short while. Moving on to Catherine Lukoff. 2050 was founded in 2019 and specializes in modern application development, serverless cloud computing, and of course AI. In her career, Catherine has served on the board of Mobile Entertainment Forum Africa and Silicon Cape Initiatives. She's been named one of the Mail and Guardian's 200 Young South Africans, was recognized for Top Women in Business and Government, featured in Old Mutual Do Great Things Startup Guide, Destiny Magazine, Power of 40 Under 40, to name just a few. Catherine, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Where Benji had wine, I have books. So it is a true story that I might be a little A-type and color code my books. So thank you to everyone who's spoken before. Mine will be a bit shorter today and just to the point. When I was asked to join this panel discussion and this conversation, it was very much about what topic do you want to choose and what would you like to speak about when it comes to adversity. And I thought back on a lot of the stories that I had to tell in my career, and what happened and what was possible and what failed and what worked. And I think that there are two really key things that stand out for me. The first is that I believe entrepreneurs need to have grit. And secondly, I believe that entrepreneurs need to be able to tell stories. So I sit with in front of me this letter that arrived in my postbox. And it is the most extraordinary letter. It's handwritten, full scat page, perfect form, dear sir, dear madam. And it's the story about Moses, who wants to tell everybody to whom he's written this letter, painstakingly by hand, that he is a young father, married, 22, has a child, lost his job. And he goes on to just tell the story about what he's surviving on, food parcels, and all he wants is a job. Can anyone help him? And I realized that there are millions and millions and millions of Moseses out there at the moment. And it made me think about the power of story and about the power of being able to tell your story, and how as humans we connect to stories, and why it's so powerful for us as entrepreneurs to be able to tell them. The second quality, which I'll get to, is grit. But let's start with storytelling. And let's face it, everybody loves a good story. And for entrepreneurs, and specifically for startup founders, I think it's really important that we're able to learn and hone that skill of storytelling. And our stories are really the culmination of, successes and key moments and pivots and motivations and the hardships and the frustration and the loneliness, as Eldred was explaining, of being a startup founder. And, some people are really good at telling stories and others not so much. But luckily, it is a skill that we can acquire. And I've really honed mine, with my family and with my friends and with my startup team. And I can tell you stories about flying first class for the first time in my life and honestly not having a single cent to my name, meeting the Sheikh of Bahrain, taking our team into a room that was themed like an ice cream parlor just so that we could discuss whether our future was going to hold. And this is a team that had gone without earning any income for over a year. And I believe that our ability to tell a story, to be able to put our elevator pitch together, to be able to tell the founding story of where we came from, and to be able to package that information so that people will believe in us is what is so key. Now, Eldred's story is a great example, right? Because most good stories follow the hero's arc. So, some of the best stories, in fact, follow the hero's arc. So it's about the call to adventure. And then, for us as founders or as entrepreneurs, like, what's that big idea we landed on that we want the world to buy into? And it's about breaking through the unknown. Usually, if you're lucky, but investment or, seed money that you have for yourself or just the support of a government or an institution. And then, of course, there are all the challenges and temptations. And then that revelation of that critical moment of when you break through, of that hero's transformation, that inevitably in the stories lead to a happy ending. But as we know, not every entrepreneur's big idea leads to a happy ending. But I do think it's our ability to shape and reshape those stories that allow us to identify with people and allow them to identify with us. And I think ultimately leads to success. So as a story, as a founder, I should say, or as an entrepreneur, especially in times like these, it's the story you tell that help investors back you. It's that inevitable, what are they buying into? And what are they able to hook their hopes and dreams on and their potential 10x exit? It's also that story that attracts the best talent, right? How do you get people to join your company and believe that what you're working on is worth working on and that it will continue to be worth backing? And similarly, how do you convince your customers, especially now, to invest in your product, to buy your product or subscribe to your service or back your big idea? And so with storytelling, it's that narrative, everything from your elevator pitch through to your founding story. You just heard Benji's founding story, to your brand identity that consistently illustrates what that compelling future is and why people need to believe in you. And that's bloody hard because you know what? In times like these where clients are taking longer to sign up or buy or pay for products and where people are having to lay off teams by the millions, companies are closing. It's really, really hard to stick to that, right? So I want to recommend a book called The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall, where he really talks about how stories make us human. And it's easy to forget that when you have this big presentation, you're sitting across from an investor or from someone you want to buy into your company. We, as kind of the custodians of these big ideas, we end up sharing a lot of stats and information and math, and we tell them why this is going to be the best idea we can solve. But we forget that the person on the other side is also just human. So how do we level the playing field? How do you, as an entrepreneur, how can you tell your story to appeal to the people you're talking to? And I want to challenge you to think about that, to think about how do we process the information we have and help other people process that information better? How do we take this time of adversity, and let's face it, the best stories come from adversity. How do we take this time and reshape it as a story that actually leads to success? So as I mentioned before, it's a skill I believe you can hone. And I think the key things to remember about stories is that you shouldn't be afraid to be vulnerable. You shouldn't be afraid to pull back the curtain and share the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? I have on many a stage shared the fact that I left the office one day, our funding hadn't come through, and I didn't want to let the team know that I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go to from that point. I didn't know what we were going to eat the next day. And I ended up crossing over a street and had a panic attack in the middle of the road. Couldn't move, bawling my eyes out, cars coming in every direction. And I stood there for about 10 minutes until a really nice human on the other side of the road actually came over and helped me to cross the street. And I went home that day and wrote a letter to myself of like, this is how you're feeling right now. And I wrote it in the middle of my notebook. it was pretty awesome coming back a year later and seeing that we'd actually moved on from that point and that we'd succeeded, which was amazing. So don't be afraid to pull back, be authentic. And if you really want to hear a good example of how authentic stories are told, listen to Alex Bloomberg's podcast called Startup, which, although started up in Silicon Valley with much better conditions, I'm sure, is a really great example of how stories could work. The second skill I think that everybody can acquire, regardless of your privilege or your background, your education, your IQ, your talent, your good looks, how much money you have, that all of that aside, grit is a skill, both a skill and a trait actually, that all of us can acquire. And so as Angela Duckworth, if you haven't read her book, literally called Grit, describes it, it's the power of passion and perseverance. So if any of you are Afrikaans, there's a great expression, aanhouer wen, which really just means keep on keeping on. And what's so great about grit is it's that ability to wake up every single morning and do it all over again, which many would probably argue is also a definition of insanity. But grit happens to be one of the biggest predicators of success. And so it's a book worth reading about why it's important to believe in your own future and why it's important that despite things going hard, you've got to believe in what you're setting up for, right? So you've got to stick to that future. It's about working really, really hard to make the future you dream for yourself a reality, regardless, like being able to climb out of the box and think about it differently and approach it differently, even if that means you pull in all your family and all your friends and all your teammates and you say, this might be the idea we're working on now, but what are we throwing out the window to do it better? So finally, I kind of want to tie it back to my story, which is it's about learning from your mistakes. So we ran a platform as a service called Niche Stream, which was the world's first niche music streaming service. And we grew really fast, really quickly, raised a lot of money up front, and ended up petering out and dying. And it's probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But what we learned from that was our ability to work with cloud infrastructure. And at the time, things like predictive analytics didn't even exist as a tool from companies like AWS. And we were trying to build our own. But what it led to is I'm now the co-founder of a company called 2050, along with my partner or my co-founder, Johan Jacobs, who actually happened to be with Mixit many years ago. And it's a cloud innovation and AI company. Now, if you know anything about me, I can't code to save my life. I'm the least likely founder of a tech company. And yet here I am running a company that specializes in modern application development and serverless cloud computing and all these amazing things. Like we're solving for incredible challenges with mind-blowing technology. And, I happen to work with some of the smartest people in the world. But if you told me 5 years ago or even 10 years ago that this is what I would be doing, I wouldn't be able to put that story together. But there's something really incredible about being able to look back and say, okay, this is where we are and how do we change that? And so, there's so many successes and tears and laughter and highs and lows and champagne-filled highs, and I should say very cheap champagne, because what anybody ever tells you, a startup founder is always cash-strapped. But at the end of the day, it allows you to tell those stories. And I think that as humanity, we have a very big story to tell at the moment. And it's a story of extreme pain and a lot of uncertainty. And I sincerely hope that letters like the ones I've been getting from Moses can change. I hope that we can make a difference. And I think that entrepreneurship is the single biggest way we can all help drive and contribute to the economy. And I sincerely hope that all of you will keep on keeping on. And so I encourage you to shape your stories and to cultivate grit. And I look forward to discussing it more on the panel. So thank you, Howard.
Thank you. What an amazing and captivating story. And one of our viewers saying what Catherine is talking about is exactly where I've been for the past 15 months. It's the hardest period of a startup's life cycle. I found that a gentle personal persuasion does the job better, build personal relationships with the first group of customers, the successful leads and the ones not yet converted. I still look forward to the day that I can actually earn a salary for the first time in over a year, but I still love what I do every day. Absolutely. I think that is that. Yeah, I read that and I thought, wow, absolutely. If that doesn't capture the journey, then I don't know what does. So, Catherine, we're going to come back to you in just a short while. Please keep those the comments coming, because your experience is just is what makes it also a little bit so much more powerful. Our last group, our last two speakers are Dricus van der Walt and Dean Meyer. They are part of the synthesis team, and they were very, very involved in working behind the scenes and on the GovChat technology. So Dricus finished his degree in engineering, computer engineering at the University of Pretoria. He joined Synthesis straight after, where he has worked exclusively on startup projects. Dean has approximately 12 years of experience within the IT industry and with responsibilities ranging from IT administration, business intelligence, and software development, as well as leadership. We're going to hear from Dricus first and then move straight over to Dean. Right, I don't know that we can hear, well, I certainly can't hear you, Dricus. So, unless we get the President's Sign Language interpreter, I think we might have a little bit of a problem. Is there something you can do to just sort your sound out?
How about now?
Absolutely magnificent.
Cool, magic. Sort of a bit of tech expertise. Like I said, thanks, Howard, for that introduction and for telling me that I'm unhearable, and now the sun is in my face, so that's also a good start. My name is Dricus van der Walt, and I'm going to move out of the sun and keep talking. Today, I'm going to talk about something that's a real passion of mine, and that is startup culture and how startup culture can be accelerated by using the cloud, such as AWS. So we're going to start with a couple of definitions. So today, we've been talking about startups. But what is a startup? So one definition for a startup is an institution that creates a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Now, for me, the most interesting part of this definition is what's not said by the definition. A startup is not defined by a size or an industry or an economic sector. The second definition is corporate culture or company culture, a set of shared values and practices that characterizes an organization. Now, again, it's interesting what the definition omits, and that's there is no right answer. There's no right corporate culture or company culture. A corporate culture is just a means to an end. It's there to propel you to your strategic goal. If we combine these two definitions, we get a third one, which is a brand of a startup culture. And that's a specific brand or variation of corporate culture that values problem solving and encourages creative thinking in a flat hierarchy. Now, I specifically say flat hierarchy as opposed to a top-down hierarchy that are present in traditional corporations. And that's because in a flat hierarchy, the ability to think creatively and to come up with intuitive ideas is spread out across the company and not just concentrated at the top. So that's a definition, startup culture. We can put it in a dictionary or on Wikipedia and we can be very happy. But for me, that's not enough. It doesn't capture what is a startup culture well enough. And that's why I added in the fourth point there, which is big picture. Right? A startup culture is a mindset and a set of philosophies that empowers boldness and innovation. So there are real-world benefits, and we'll be talking about them in a couple of slides. But they are only a manifestation of a high-functioning corporation. So what are these keys to startup culture? What are some of these philosophies that I mentioned? So I have 4 keys here, and we'll be going through them. So first of all, constant innovation. Constantly innovate to keep your business alive and to move along with the customer's requirements. Number 2, turn passion into business, or better yet, turn your business into your passion. Thirdly, break rules to innovate. Don't bend the rules to adapt, but break them to innovate. And finally, closely aligned to the third point, is see what doesn't exist and make it exist. So For an example, for the two of these, you can think of a company like Netflix. Netflix didn't adapt the video store a little bit. They asked the question, do we need video stores at all? If you can still remember video stores. What are some of the benefits of accelerated culture? So these are tangible benefits, real world benefits that a company or organization can feel when utilizing the cloud, for example, AWS. So the first one we have there is fail fast and iterate often. The freedom to fail gives you the freedom to build and to experiment. Security ingrained gives you the opportunity to build a product or service with security and availability in mind from the start. Simplified technology means that you can spend less time thinking about technology and debating technological choices and spend more time doing what matters. So like Vusi said, to put yourself in your client's shoes and to have empathy for their needs. Number 4 is reduced capital requirements. So with cloud technology, you can build a POC, that's a proof of concept, without massive capital backing. So without a lot of money up front, you can build something. Continuing the benefits, you have accessible expertise. That means that you have access to the people that know the technology, that know how to work it. Grow and scale gives you a strategic option for growth and scalability. So for example, in Eldred's story, you can go from serving 100 messages a minute to 12,000 messages a minute in a matter of days. First mover advantage or early mover advantage means that you can enter the market early, and in a saturated market that gives you an edge over the competition. And finally, cloud technology allows you to deliver quality product or services to your clients at all times. And with that, I'll hand over to Dean.
Thank you, Dricus. Good day, everyone. My name is Dean Meyer. Just greetings to our panel. I think there were some really great stories there. So thank you for including me, just to share some insights about how we're seeing business success being accelerated by adopting cloud technologies. So in these trying times, especially now during COVID, there was a massive change in how we do things. Technology is constantly changing, and we're finding that clients who put in the efforts to stay ahead of the technology curve are able to fundamentally change the way they operate and are realizing great value. So for my presentation, I wanted to frame it in the following narrative: realizing business value through innovation enabled by technology. Now, there are 3 key aspects to unpack there, and that would be business value, innovation, and technology. So first off, business value. What exactly do I mean by business value? So I'm not referring to the value of a company, but rather the value that the business as a whole realizes when they adopt an evolutionary platform and host their products for clients on that platform. Next up, innovation. So this speaks to something original and more effective, something new that breaks into the market or society. So this is new ideas, being creative, expanding your imagination, and figuring out how to disrupt. And then finally, the technology. So technology is at the core of the movement and is the enabler. This allows for businesses to iterate faster and realize greater success. So at Synthesis, we've been at the forefront of cloud technology for a few years, testing and pushing the boundaries, but we too started somewhere. So about 5 years ago, I recall many whiteboard sessions in our CIO's office describing an elaborate architecture, decoupled, massively scalable, running on this on-demand infrastructure. And I didn't really realize how much it would impact how we work, how we think, and how we operate today. So needless to say, the impact was massive. It was disruptive, to put it more accurately. So what we're seeing now is that through the adoption of cloud technologies and best practices, clients who are truly evolving their ideas at a rapid pace. And we are seeing testing of ideas with much lower risk, much lower cost, and much more confidence. So in terms of business value, the first major benefit comes in the form of cost savings. And this is the typical driver for cloud adoption. However, studies by the RDC and AWS against 27 large organizations have revealed that approximately $20 million of value is being added per year per organization. And that's really impressive. So to break it down further, where the value is being realized, this would be in IT cost savings, which actually only amounts for 8% of the value being realized when adopting cloud. Then risk mitigation. This occurs by reducing the amount of time wasted when systems go offline or clients experience issues. And then we have IT staff productivity. And this is IT staff moving away from day-to-day support and actually being able to focus on strategic IT initiatives. But then the most important aspect is business productivity. So business productivity accounts for almost 50% of the value being realized when companies adopt cloud. So companies can now truly become agile and take advantage of new opportunities faster. Staff are empowered with all the tools they need to craft solutions, and these are solutions that can scale and be easily distributed across multiple geographies. So at Synthesis, we're working hard to empower our clients to realize their maximum potential by adopting cloud technology and ultimately accelerate their business success. So I thank you for your time, and please reach out if you'd be interested in discussing how Synthesis could help your business accelerate their value. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Dricus. And if you could bring back some of, in fact, all of the panelists, let's start to have just a little bit of a discussion. I know we are running a little bit late. Everything, if you do have to drop off, everything will be available on our YouTube channel. But we will obviously try and get through a few questions as right now. All right, the first one that I wanted to address, I wanted to talk to the issue, and I was just going to say, Benji, if you want to put yourself on mute because there's a little bit of noise in the background. I'm not sure if Vusi is around as well. I'm not seeing him on the panel, and he is coming in there. All right, so Vusi, I want to start with you. Something that Catherine alluded to, you certainly have alluded to it as well, and I want to ask you and then get Catherine's view as well. Is Vusi, what does grit mean to you?
I laughed when Catherine mentioned the book Grit, because one of my board members actually gave me the book at the beginning of the year and said to me, "You need to read this." I often wonder about.
Do you need to read it?
Yeah.
Do you need to read it, or is grit something that is part of either who we are or part of our experience? Does it help you to read it?
You know what the problem is?
Hmm.
I think the problem is this, that, and that's kind of for me what the takeout was from the book, is that there's certainly a level of insanity that you need to have to do what we do. If you don't have it, you just can't do what we do. And that's okay. There are people who don't have that. But the problem is when you're going through those incidences where your sanity is being tested, the whole world tells you that what you're doing is wrong. Your entire being feels like this is not right. The evidence suggests you're going to fail. But there's just something that says, just one more email, one more client meeting, just do one more, right? And if you don't have a base, an ideological base or an academic base of understanding what that driver is, you will think I listened to Eldred's story and I was just like, geez, it's funny how close we are in terms of how we relate with those stories, right? So When I started my growth fund, I sold my business at a consulting firm. I sold the firm. I took a portion of the funds that I'd made out of that and I put it into the business. And I was like, that's it, I'm doing this. And as all things go, your burn rate is far higher than you expected would be. Your runway is far shorter than you expected would be. So you end up with a Boeing 747, but you're riding it on a gravel runway in the rural Eastern Cape. And you're hoping this thing's going to take off, right? Now, the rest of the world, you're seeing Emirates or Qatar Airline. That's what you see. But that's what you're seeing, but that's not what the world is seeing, right? So I think that grit is very, very, very important. I would just want to close by saying that I actually think that it's kind of like that last 2 reps at the gym that really makes the difference. So if you talk to any great trainer, great bodybuilder, they'll tell you between rep 1 and 10, you look okay. Between rep 10 and 12 is when you really put in the amazing work. It's when the body is burning, when your mind is fatigued, and you're just completely spent. So yeah, grit is, in my mind, is very important.
Okay. And the other thing I was thinking whilst you were talking, Vusi, is that idea about the posting a letter, which I think is amazing. And in South Africa, obviously our post service works well for us because you don't want us to open it for a year. It'll really take about that amount of time for us to receive that letter. So I think that's a tremendous, tremendous idea. Maybe that's something that Eldred could address at some point. So with GovChat, work on the postal system. So Catherine, you walk across the street and you have this panic attack, and I think that most people in this space can relate to that moment, whether it is at 4 o'clock in the morning where you wake up and it's the loneliest place in the world, or whether it's an incident that triggers you. It's a very, you're surrounded by cars and people, but it's very lonely. How do you come back from that?
Sure. More insanity. Actually, probably something that Eldred alluded to. Friends, family, and extraordinary team members. People talk about their employees. I talk about teams. I think you should always employ people who are smarter than you or attract people who are smarter than you, and you should be able to rely on them, and you should have a group of people that you're willing to be vulnerable to. There was a very long time that I just pulled right out of the startup scene because I could not face the fakery anymore. You go to these events and everyone's like, hi, how are you? What are you up to? And I was I'm like, I'm done. I don't want to lie. I want to tell you that it sucks right now. I'm not like, I have no money left. I've sold my house. My husband thinks I'm mad. My friends are like, Jesus, I'm tired of buying your meals for you. Just, enough already. Go get a corporate job.
But you're supposed to say you're crushing it. Yeah.
And everybody's like, but you get so much press and you speak and I'm like, yeah, it's just facade. So it's tough. And it's tough because, we have to pretend that everything's great all the time because there's this myth that as a startup founder or an entrepreneur, you have to be okay all the time. Yeah. And so there's so many lessons I've learned in that, right? In the ability to be okay with the choices I've made, but to know that at every step of the way I was authentic and clear with the people who were involved so that they didn't feel afterwards like they bought into something that they didn't have all the facts for. And to be okay with taking risks, because sometimes I think you've got to understand who you are. And maybe my ego is just not the right ego to work in a corporate environment where someone else has the power to tell me what's right or wrong. I want to at least figure that out for myself. And it just took me a while and we mourned it like you would a death. And we came out of that and said, well, what are we good at? And we found it and we're really happy. But it isn't easy. And I think the one final thing I'll say is no one tells you how to shut a business down. There is so much literature how to start it. No one tells you about fiduciary duties. No one tells you how to deregister a company with SIPC and how if you still owe people money, they'll make you pay it back before you can deregister. There are all these things no one tells you. And so I'm glad for the lessons I've learned, and I'm going to take that grit forward, just more of it.
So do you think, and I want to ask Vusi and maybe Eldred can answer this question as well, is there certain cultures that in certain countries that value the startup environment where failure is actually not seen as a terribly negative thing? You fail, you move on, you fail quick. I think Drickus mentioned that in his presentation. Have we created that culture here in South Africa where failure is acceptable, and I mean failure, or do we have a long way to go on that? Vusi, starting with you.
Okay, I thought you'd let Eldred go, but sure, I'm happy to take a stab. So I think I love Catherine's thought, by the way, about how we've romanticized this thing. I said in an interview the other day that actually, if my son told me he wanted to start a business in South Africa 2020, me being me, I'd tell him you have to be kidding. That's not going to happen. But I think, so again, it goes back to the incentive structure. I think the problem in South Africa, Howard, is we don't have an incentive structure that understands what startup entrepreneurs actually go through. Mm-hmm. We don't have a social structure that understands how to absorb startup entrepreneurs that don't particularly do well. So, for instance, in the Nordic countries, the health system is so good that even if you're not on private medical aid, you get decent health care. Even if your kids don't go to private school, you get a decent education for your children. That not being the case in South Africa means that many startup entrepreneurs have to draw big salaries to sustain a lifestyle that's fairly decent, to just provide for their families, frankly. And that changes the dynamics. And then on top of that, I think we also have to address, and I'd be keen to hear from the other panelists, the consumer culture in South Africa. So because we come from a massively oligopolistic structure of our economy, you've got 5 large retail banks, if you include Investec. You've got 7 large retail companies. You've got 9 large mining houses. Because of that kind of culture, the average consumer in South Africa is expecting phenomenal service all the time. And we know that that's not the case in a startup. So there's almost no emotional give for a startup that's making startup mistakes, right? And guys, forget that by the time you're downloading an American app in South Africa, it's gone through 50 million consumers in the US. It's been through several iterations of build, right? A guy starting an app in South Africa or a business in South Africa doesn't have that kind of leeway. So the answer to your question is no, we don't have a startup-friendly culture. And I think that those of us who are in the ecosystem today are kind of at the forefront of trying to push that culture. And clearly it's, it's not easy. It's very, very difficult.
Eldred, your thoughts on that? Benji, I want to ask you that as well, but let's hear from Eldred. Do we have a startup culture, and how have you managed in this environment?
So I think failure is important. If I look at VCs in the US, and Vusi might agree with me, you need to show that you've started a few businesses before they borrow you money. And that's the pure reason for that is that they're not going to allow you to waste their money. And so you have to make sure that you can showcase that you started businesses, that you failed, you start again, you learn some lessons, you fail, you start again at least 3 or 4 times, and then you go and ask for funds. I guess that was my journey as well. I definitely did not want to kind of waste anyone's money, and that's why I didn't reach out to a bank. I didn't reach out to anyone. I wanted to kind of just understand whether I was onto something. I think Vusi and Catherine is correct to say that I think we are a bit crazy. We are a bit mad, because I'll never forget the first friend that I went to with my idea told me that he thought that I was better than that. And I left that breakfast meeting being the most depressed person ever. But the next meeting that I went to was the meeting that opened the door for GovChat. And just imagine I left that breakfast meeting, the first one that I had, and said, look, I think that I must just pack up right here and here. and go and look for a job, go into my actual profession. So in grit, don't give up, don't take no for an answer. Work hard, persevere, and be a bit crazy, and I'm sure that you are going to make it.
Benji, your journey.
Yeah, so I think obviously not as much experience as some of the others here, and quite a sort of different avenue, but completely agree with a lot of the sentiment that's been shared. I think in our case also we were pretty crazy, and I mentioned earlier naive, sort of helping us get to this point. And without that, it's not really an encouraged route to go. I think the opportunity cost is high. The fear of failure and the perception of failure, I think, as Eldred mentioned, just isn't necessarily accepted. And yeah, I think it's not sort of a natural market to start a company and to build a tech startup particularly. I think, yeah, to the point on the VC side, also in our case, it was a journey we kind of went on and learned through making mistakes ourselves. We found the market here is typically from a much more traditional background of asset management or private equity. They don't. I think it's changing quite recently and for the better. But 6 years ago, trying to raise funding from a VC in South Africa to build drone technology using machine learning to help farmers optimize the way they farm was kind of unheard of. And I mean, the response that we get at the time was kind of come back when you've got 100 or 200 paying customers. And I mean, obviously, as kind of early founders, your response is, well, at that point, we won't need you, you know? And I think it just wasn't necessarily an accepting culture. And unfortunately, a lot of it requires the experience that you obviously don't have to start off with to get access to that capital and access to that experience. And I think that in our case, fortunately, we were able to make the mistakes and learn from them ourselves, and the market was able to kind of evolve around us. But it's very much a kind of tough space to build a startup. I think just finally, outside of the kind of social and perception side of things, it's very much, we believe, the perfect market to start this type of company. I spoke about it a bit earlier. The kind of lack of competition, it's blue fields, there's opportunity to really focus on building solutions and helping people solve actual problems. It's just the support in the ecosystem itself we found isn't there. And without that changing, I think it's going to continue to be this challenging.
So someone's at the door, but
Sorry.
no one needed to own up. Everybody's on the panel, so it could have been anybody. So the interesting point that Eldred made that earlier, where we saw the number of people looking for grants for 350 Rand using an iPhone 10 was an absolutely staggering little bit of information for me, because to some extent that makes me very concerned about what our priorities are here in South Africa. Catherine, what do you think that says about where we're at in terms of an approach? Does it say anything?
It's tough. I'm not sure what it says. I think to Eldred's point about the failure side, there's a culture here. So I've done a lot of work in Nigeria and Kenya and everywhere else. And, you know, my very good friend, Nick Carolumbus, has written a book called The Side Hustle. And I remember the first time I went to Kenya and came back, and I was there and someone said to me, "What do you do for a living?" And I told them my one job I do. And the question was, well, what else do you do? And I was like, well, this one job is full time. Right? And only to discover that there's a culture in Kenya where you have a job before you go to your real job. Then over lunchtime, you've got another job. And in the evenings before you go back home, you've got yet another job. And together, all of that allows you to bring enough money in to put your kids through school so that by the time they hit 25, they've all got master's degrees. And so I think that in South Africa, there's definitely, I mean, Benji's point about trying to raise VC a while back, I mean, we had the same problem. You know, come to us when you have X number of users. Well, then we don't need you anymore. We ended up getting up to a point where we had 20,000 users and 86 minutes of listening time a day, and it's still not enough. So I wonder at what point the market here is prepared to take more risks, and at what point we recognize that as investors and they have to take more risk. This is a riskier market, but hopefully the outcome is also more rewarding. Whether that's going to change, I don't know. I have just decided to go the route of not raising money again for quite some time because, boy, do you need a thick skin. Mine is one thing.
Can I just say something which I think is important here?
Yes, sure.
If you think raising money for a startup is difficult, try raising money to raise money for startups. So, you know, and that's another part of the conversation that we like very seldom have is institutional investors. I tweeted this yesterday, and then I got a call from somebody very high up at the PIC, and I said to them, don't phone me, credit money in my bank account. But institutional investors in South Africa have just been sitting completely on the sidelines. It annoys, if I am honest, it annoys the shit out of me that you have CEOs who earn very big salaries who understand the social issues we face in South Africa. They, in my mind, are just as guilty as the politicians who talk about the importance of entrepreneurship. But then that's where it ends. It's a statement on a press release. There's no actual money put behind it. And of course, you know, the law of Black economic empowerment, the 6 pillars, enterprise development, the formation of a lot of the ED funds has freed up money and brought money into that space. And so there's a lot of VC firms using ED funds to do VC type of work. Whether or not that's a sustainable business model, I think is a different story. But in a country like South Africa, where you've got 55 million citizens, over 80% of them Black African, the average, you know, I think they said something like the average unemployment rate for young Black females in the northern provinces between the ages of 16 and 35 is well over 60%. A government that's not able to create jobs then turns around and says to young people, build businesses, but doesn't make sure that you've got strong capital available. And then when you go and ask for the capital, the question becomes, well, who are you? Who do you know? It's if we don't get that right, we're actually not going to fix the problem. And you can, you know, Catherine mentioned Kenya. We've got a Kenya operation. You see similar things in Ghana and what they've been able to do. Look at what's happening in Kuala Lumpur, what the Singaporeans did. Just go to Israel. You can't fix a startup problem and an employment problem without capital and massive amounts of capital. And I just worry that we're not seeing that come into the system yet. So even if you look at the latest recovery plan published by the ANC, there's no real mention on that. We're still talking about infrastructure spending. And we're going to need to see much, much more money being pumped into the system.
Well, in fact, one of our viewers look at the loans, the COVID bank loans that are simply not being given out to companies that really could do with them. Sorry, Catherine, you were saying?
I was going to say 2 points. Firstly, I mean, if you take just the money they're trying to bail SAA out with, can you imagine how many businesses you can start with that? Even if only 1% of them succeed, we'll be much better off than we are right now. But to this point about government supporting, I mean, look at what Startup Chile did, right? If you're going to foster a culture of entrepreneurship from the ground up, then do it. But do it properly. Remove the red tape and make it possible to access capital, and not capital that comes at a massive price. But be prepared. You know, I love this VC saying we're early stage venture. It's like, well, what is early stage? Can someone give me a definition? Because where I sit from, early stage means I've already got to show you a profit. So, you know, if the government is going to fix, then what are we doing to support the kind of system D, as Nigeria calls it, to come up and create their own economy and actually make a success of it? But we just don't do that. So not to talk politics too much.
Well, it's an interesting question because where's government responsibility in all of this? You know, we don't.
I'll jump in. It's simple. Mariana Mazzucato wrote the book, The Entrepreneurial State, close on 5-6 years ago. I was doing my MBA in London at the time when the book came out. The ideas in the book are still there. They're pretty clear. Number of the components you're using on your phone today, the very invention of the World Wide Web, the components on our computers, the stuff that industry's built on was funded early stage by the state. All right. So the point about it is this: the state cannot expect private capital to build businesses from which the state is going to get the tax base. Because if it does do, you have to remember that capital and return have a supremely monogamous relationship. Capital will never cheat on return. It'll never happen. So if you have that kind of system in the environment that we're in, then capital is going to flow to the traditional asset classes. It's going to flow right into the listed stocks. It's going to keep being absorbed by Naspers out of South Africa into China and then into Tencent. So what's in effect happening is South African pensioners are building the Chinese economy. And then we're wondering why Chinese companies are coming into South Africa, and all we're doing is we're consuming their products. Somebody has to sit there and go, there's a reason people like myself in industry have been arguing for a relook at Regulation 28, bring more money into the VC space, make more money available in private equity, make more money more early stage. If we don't do that, then at the very least, let's stop pretending like we're trying to. Right? I mean, Eldred's story is a perfect example, because Eldred, even in his own story, says a private individual stepped in, which means that we didn't have the safety net in the system to go, actually, here's a fairly solid idea. Now, it's not that the money's not there. Free State Development Corporation, the last time I checked it, well over 500-600 million rand in dry powder. I might be wrong, but that was the numbers the last time I checked. I might be wrong on this. But if you think about what that kind of money can do, now Catherine can't access that money. She doesn't know who to talk to. She doesn't have the networks. She's not connected with the people. And if you still have a system where you've got to be connected rather than a system where it's the best idea that wins, we're not going to fix it, guys. It's unfortunately the way it is. It really, for me, it frustrates me. And, I'm going to keep quiet.
No, please don't do that. But what about the informal sector? If Catherine doesn't have access, what about people who actually are entrepreneurs, because they are finding ways every day to make a living, to do something innovative? It might be low tech, but it's certainly an entrepreneurial environment.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's an inclusion question, right? So what's going to happen in another 26 years, guys? We're going to have another conversation about how do we rebase South Africa's demographics? How do we include the excluded? How do we make sure that the majority of the population participates? At some point, we all have to wake up and realize that the situation is the way it is because we brought it to where we are. I want to make this very quick point, and then I'm going to try and keep quiet. So the other day, I'm talking to some of the guys who made the plan available for B4SA. The plan that gets sent to particular people who are in authority and power. And the amount of lethargy from those people in recognizing the moment we're in. Lethargy in recognizing that here's a plan by business to save businesses and save jobs in a country that is in technical recession, highest levels of unemployment, the worst macros we've seen in over 45 years. Still lethargy. And I think the reason is because there's a disconnect between the people who have power and the people who have ideas. So the people who have power, capital, and are controlling institutions of policy, they're getting paid at the end of the month, whether there is a lockdown or not. So actually for them, it kind of doesn't matter if we're in level 5 or level 1, it's of no consequence. But for the taxi owner, for the spaza shop owner, for the tavern owner, to make your point about the informal economy, Howard, right? For those people, their livelihoods are tied directly to what we need to do. If we don't fix it, it's going to be a big problem for all of us.
All right. I want to, unfortunately, we can't go on very much more. We had an hour and a half. It's now been 2 hours. But I want to hear from everyone here on the panel, if you don't mind, in less than 3 sentences, why. We know why things are difficult. We know what our challenges are. Why are we going to be okay? Drickus?
Me first. Why are we going to be okay? Well, I think as individuals and as a nation, there is a significant amount of grit, as Catherine talked about. I think all the lessons that we discussed today are relevant in our country. I think an interesting point that I would like to make as Vusi and as the conversation was going on, when I was talking about startup culture, it's not just in organizations that's applicable. I think the concept of startup culture can also be applied on a national scale. And I think that's something that South Africa needs, is a more flat hierarchy, lower power index startup culture. But I think we'll be okay.
Catherine?
Well, a couple of reasons. I'll keep it short. But if I think about the technology we have at our disposal today, there are two things that really play in our favor. Three things, actually. As South Africans, as Dirk has mentioned, we really do have grit. We have to overcome so much more than any other. I mean, if you were doing this in Silicon Valley, you wouldn't necessarily have to overcome as many hurdles. And so I think that we are well poised to solve challenges, right, regardless. The second thing that I think is incredible, I look at our business now, we're able to work with technology that is affordable, that allows us to do some pretty phenomenal things for very big clients. I mean, we're really fortunate to work with some of the biggest retailers and banks in the country. And again, if I'd started 2050 out of the US, I'd be picking up the crumbs of what the other big businesses are doing, except now I can take really big case studies out to the rest of the world to show them what we've been doing in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's in less than a year. So I think that we shouldn't underestimate that there's scope to stand out and do better. Yeah. And then finally, as I mentioned, that tech. When we were running eStream, we were trying to build our own graph databases to do recommendation. Now I can go to a company like AWS and say, well, great, let's use AWS Personalize and come up with recommendations that, as someone mentioned earlier, speaks to the need of the actual consumer. And so those are becoming more affordable and more accessible. And it might not be filtering down to where it needs to be, but it's at least starting to filter. And I think that's something to hold on to and to say in 3 sentences.
Dean, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Howard. So I agree with what everyone said. I think we have a very resilient population. We've been through some really stressful times, and like Vusi said, I mean, this isn't something we haven't faced before. Maybe not our generation, but previously. But I think, from my side, focusing specifically on technology, really, like, it's being able to get your idea to market is coming in at a much lower cost than it would have, just 5-6 years back. So definitely, like, people are able to, they don't need to rely that much on these big structures. They can actually do it themselves, do it a lot quicker and without requiring so much capital. So definitely people need to start leveraging all the technology that's becoming available.
Absolutely. Vusi, your final thoughts?
Yeah, everything Catherine said.
All right, fine. So that's so that is very, very interesting indeed. I want to thank everybody. Thank you for your incredible input, for a very thought-provoking conversation. I too believe that South Africa, I think we're going to be all right. I think we've got the most incredible people. We can laugh at the most tragic things. We can see humor where we need to. I do believe that we have the grit. Next week, we are going to also be putting a panel together. In fact, we have put a panel together on AI in the retail space, how the retail industry is changing and will be changing as due to AI and COVID. So the retail revolution, how COVID-19 has changed our behavior. Please make a point of registering for that, and we'd love to host you. We'd love to have you join us for that as well. To our panelists today, thank you for your incredible input, and I hope that we will get together again soon to continue these and other conversations. I'm Howard Feldman. This has been the Synthesis AWS Summit. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.